Most people think the most dangerous inmates in California's prisons are on the Mainline, the general population. But what if I told you that some of the most violent, ruthless, and unpredictable prison gangs operate inside the sensitive needs yards, the very units meant to protect inmates from harm? This is the hidden world of SNY. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the early 2000s. California's Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation introduced SNY yards as a way to separate vulnerable inmates, those who had dropped out of gangs, become informants, or had safety concerns due to charges like sex crimes, from the general population. These inmates were often targets in the Mainline, assaulted or even killed for being PCs, protective custody cases. The CDCR aimed to offer these inmates a safer environment. But this created an unintended consequence. By concentrating thousands of ex-gang members, informants, and predators together, people who couldn't be trusted by anyone, SNY yards became breeding grounds for new power structures. New hierarchies emerged. And with them came new gangs that didn't follow the old prison politics. They weren't governed by the same codes. In many cases, they were more volatile, more unpredictable, and far more brutal. The idea of SNY being safer was now under serious question. What began as a protective measure quickly evolved into a hidden war zone inside the prison system, invisible to the public eye, but just as deadly as the yards it was meant to contrast. And from this volatile environment, a new type of gang was born. The 2-5s, the independent riders, the northern riders, and most infamous of all, the notorious insane empire, also known as the IE. But before we dive into those names, we need to understand the foundation. SNY isn't just a yard, it's a psychological and political battlefield. Inmates on these yards are often seen as traitors, and many have nothing left to lose. Some join these yards not to escape violence, but to reorganize, recruit, and dominate in a new setting where the rules were still being written. The SNY system designed to protect had unknowingly created a vacuum of power, and in the prison world, wherever there's a vacuum, someone will always rise to fill it. When we think of prison gangs, names like the Mexican Mafia, Aryan Brotherhood, and Black Guerrilla family often come to mind. These groups have a long history, well-established codes of conduct, and clear territorial control within the prison system. Their power structures are hierarchical and, while violent, somewhat predictable. But the gangs that emerged inside sensitive needs yards, or SNY, are something different. They are often described by corrections officers and experts as less predictable and more dangerous. Why? First, it's important to understand who ends up in SNY. Unlike the Mainline, where gang affiliations are strong and often inherited or deeply ingrained, SNY yards are a melting pot of inmates who are rejected by every major gang for various reasons. These include snitches, sex offenders, former gang members who debriefed or cooperated with authorities, and others who have no protection in the general population. This diverse mix creates a volatile social dynamic. Traditional gang loyalties often break down here. Without a strong, respected hierarchy, these inmates band together in new formations. These groups aren't bound by decades of traditions or codes of honor. Instead, they operate with a brutal pragmatism, often resorting to extreme violence to establish control or settle disputes quickly. Take the 2-5s, for example, one of the most notorious SNY gangs. The 2-5s are primarily made up of sex offenders and informants. They are viewed with extreme hostility by other inmates but wield considerable power inside SNY yards because they band together tightly and often strike preemptively against threats. Another group, the independent riders, rose as a force of inmates who rejected affiliation with any traditional gang. Their motto is often summed up as, "Do your own time." But beneath the surface, they are heavily involved in smuggling, extortion, and violent turf wars within SNY yards. Perhaps the most infamous is the Insane Empire, or IE. The IE operates with the ruthlessness of a street gang, combined with the cunning of a prison gang. Its members are involved in numerous violent acts, including stabbings, assaults, and even orchestrating killings inside prisons. The IE's fluid membership and loose structure make it difficult for authorities to infiltrate or predict their moves. What makes SNY gangs particularly dangerous is the lack of established rules. Traditional prison gangs, as violent as they are, follow a certain set of rules to maintain order. There's an unspoken code about how and when violence is used and who can be targeted. SNY gangs operate in a lawless environment where loyalty is minimal and betrayal is common. This leads to frequent, often brutal violence with little warning. Unlike the Mainline, where gangs often avoid open warfare to protect their broader influence, SNY gangs resort to violence to send clear messages and quickly consolidate power. The CDCR has tried various approaches to curb SNY gang activity, including isolating known leaders, moving inmates around, and increasing surveillance. But these efforts have often backfired. Why? Because removing one leader creates a power vacuum that younger, more violent inmates rush to fill. And unlike traditional gangs where elders control younger members, SNY gangs often have younger, more impulsive leadership that escalates violence rather than containing it. Furthermore, the political pressure on the CDCR to protect vulnerable inmates means they cannot simply place these gangs in general population yards, nor can they fully isolate them without risking lawsuits or accusations of inhumane treatment. The result is a powder keg of violent inmates living in close proximity, constantly jockeying for control. In recent years, the rise of SNY gangs has led to an increase in violent incidents inside California prisons. Stabbings, assaults, and even murders have skyrocketed within these protected yards. A grim irony that calls into question the effectiveness of the SNY system itself. By now, you understand that the sensitive needs yards, or SNY, are far from safe havens. In fact, they are home to some of the most dangerous prison gangs in California. In this part, we'll focus on the major players: the Insane Empire, the 2-5s, the Independent Riders, and the Northern Riders. Let's start with the Insane Empire. The Insane Empire is often described by corrections officers as the wild card of SNY gangs. Unlike traditional prison gangs, the IE has a looser structure. Members come and go more freely, which makes them harder to track and predict. The IE is involved in almost every kind of illicit prison activity: drug trafficking, extortion, smuggling weapons, and orchestrating violent attacks. What sets them apart is their willingness to escalate violence rapidly, often using it as a tool to intimidate other inmates and even staff. IE members are notorious for their brutal initiation rituals and a culture of fear. These rituals are designed to break down individuals mentally and physically, forcing absolute loyalty. Failure to comply often results in severe beatings or even death. Leadership within IE is fluid but heavily influenced by inmates who have street gang backgrounds or ties outside prison walls. This connection to street-level crime organizations allows IE to coordinate criminal enterprises beyond the prison gates, including drug shipments and contract hits. Next, the 2-5s, arguably the most feared SNY gang. The 2-5s are primarily made up of sex offenders and inmates who have provided information to authorities, often referred to as snitches. This group is widely despised throughout the prison system, making their survival depend heavily on brutal violence and strict internal loyalty. Despite their controversial makeup, 2-5s control significant territory inside SNY yards. Their members work together to protect one another from attacks and often engage in preemptive strikes to neutralize threats. The 2-5s have a reputation for extreme cruelty. They employ tactics such as surprise stabbings and orchestrated assaults designed to send clear, terrifying messages. This brutality makes them one of the most lethal groups in the prison system. Then, there are the independent riders. Unlike other gangs that claim allegiance to larger criminal organizations, the independent riders pride themselves on autonomy. Their slogan, "Ride Your Own," reflects a rejection of traditional gang structures and allegiances. Despite this, independent riders are heavily involved in illegal activities. They are masters at smuggling contraband, including drugs, cell phones, and weapons. They also run extortion rackets within SNY yards, charging protection fees to weaker inmates. The independent riders are known for their street smarts and ability to manipulate both inmates and prison staff. This adaptability makes them a formidable force, often operating behind the scenes to control key operations. Finally, the Northern Riders. This group is less well known, but no less dangerous. Composed mainly of inmates from Northern California, the Northern Riders have carved out a niche inside the SNY yards. They have a reputation for violent turf wars with other SNY gangs, particularly the IE and the 2-5s. Despite their smaller numbers, they are fiercely loyal and willing to engage in brutal confrontations to protect their interests. Beyond their violent activities, Northern Riders are also involved in intelligence gathering within the prison system. They maintain communication networks that feed information to street gangs, law enforcement, and other inmates, influencing power dynamics both inside and outside prison walls. The power wielded by these gangs in SNY yards is staggering. Unlike the Mainline, where power is often exercised through strict hierarchies, SNY gangs use unpredictability and fear as weapons. Their members live in a constant state of alert, knowing that betrayal or weakness could mean death. This environment fosters a cycle of violence that is difficult to break. Moreover, these gangs often influence prison staff through bribery, intimidation, or manipulation. Corrupt guards sometimes turn a blind eye to illegal activity or even facilitate smuggling and communication with the outside world. The reach of SNY gangs extends beyond the prison walls. Many members maintain connections to street gangs, continuing criminal enterprises on the outside. This makes SNY gangs a critical component in broader organized crime networks. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, or CDCR, faces an uphill battle in managing the chaos inside sensitive needs yards. Designed as safe spaces, these yards have instead become hotbeds of violence and gang activity. CDCR's strategies to control SNY gangs have included increased surveillance, gang unit task forces, isolation of leaders, and inmate transfers. But these efforts often produce mixed results. One approach has been to identify and isolate high-profile gang leaders within SNY to disrupt their influence. However, this strategy frequently leads to power vacuums that younger, more violent inmates rush to fill. These new leaders tend to escalate violence even further in their efforts to prove dominance. Another tactic involves reclassifying inmates and moving them between yards to break up gang networks. While this can temporarily disrupt operations, it often disperses gang members into other facilities, spreading violence rather than containing it. The use of intelligence gathering and undercover operations within prisons has improved, but SNY gangs are notoriously secretive and use sophisticated communication methods. They rely on coded messages, corrupt staff, and outside contacts to stay ahead of prison authorities. Politically, CDCR is caught between competing pressures. On one side is the public demand for safer prisons and reduced inmate violence. On the other is legal and human rights obligations to protect vulnerable populations, including those housed in SNY yards, from harm. This tightrope walk makes drastic measures difficult. For example, locking down entire yards or severely restricting inmate movement can lead to accusations of cruel or unusual punishment, lawsuits, and increased tension inside prisons. Furthermore, prison overcrowding has compounded the problem. California's prisons operate above capacity, meaning that vulnerable inmates often cannot be adequately separated from violent offenders. This overcrowding fuels conflict, undermining the original goal of SNY. Experts and former correctional officers have called for reforms that address root causes, improving mental health services, expanding rehabilitation programs, and increasing staffing to reduce the influence of gangs. Technology also offers some hope. Enhanced surveillance cameras, body scanners, and AI-driven behavior analysis can help detect and prevent violent outbreaks before they escalate. However, these solutions require significant funding, political will, and a long-term commitment, all of which face challenges in a complex and often politicized correctional environment. Looking ahead, the future of SNY yards hangs in the balance. Without major reforms, the cycle of violence and gang power struggles is likely to continue. Inmates will keep relying on brutal violence to survive and control, while authorities struggle to maintain order. Some have proposed alternative approaches, such as smaller, specialized units focused on therapy and rehabilitation for vulnerable inmates. These units would prioritize mental health and behavioral interventions, aiming to break the cycle of violence rather than simply contain it. Others advocate for more community-based solutions, including programs that prepare inmates for re-entry and reduce gang influence by addressing the socioeconomic factors that fuel criminal behavior outside prison walls. What is clear is that the old model of lock them up and keep them separate no longer works for SNY inmates. As the CDCR grapples with these challenges, the stakes remain high, not only for the safety of inmates and staff inside the prisons, but for the communities outside where gang violence often spills over. The story of SNY is a cautionary tale about unintended consequences, the complexity of prison management, and the urgent need for innovation in corrections policy. Thank you for joining this deep dive into the world inside SNY, the prison gangs more dangerous than the Mainline.